Recaptures the dribble. Free to shoot. Banks it in! A three-pointer for Trae Young! You are a cheat code!
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another one of my videos. And in this video, we're gonna do something a little bit different today. So we're actually gonna go over the NBA standings, and the reason we're gonna do that is because they actually matter, and we're gonna go over those reasons on why they matter and why they could matter for your fantasy team specifically. All right, so as we go through the standings, I'm going to talk about most teams individually and why it matters if they continue this trend or why they don't. So we're going to go over the Eastern Conference standings first. And first up we have is the Philadelphia 76ers. Yeah. So anyway, they're currently 7-1 and they're killing it. They are playing great team ball right now. So the reason why this might matter for your fantasy basketball team is because if they continue playing like this and if they're in the top 1, 2, 3 seeds, you might see more rest days for Joel Embiid because I think he's only had one so far. I think he played the back-to-back, or he's going to play this back-to-back. I'm not quite sure, but I haven't heard any news about him missing these back-to-back games yet. So we may see more rest from Embiid in that regard. But another thing to think about is if the Sixers keep playing like this, there's no reason why we're going to break up this team for James Harden. So I know a lot of people have been talking about Harden to Philly. Well, if they continue to be the top seed in the Eastern Conference, there's going to be no Harden to Philly, and those talks have severely died down. And I'm kind of surprised, but we're going to get into Houston a bit here. But in terms of just Philadelphia going after James Harden, I find it highly, highly unlikely as long as they keep playing this kind of basketball. So next up, we have a surprise with the Orlando Magic. They are currently 6-2. So Vucevic is playing stellar basketball right now for fantasy. He's been playing lights out. He's giving you a little bit of everything across the board. His free throw percentage should be a little bit better than it has been. But if recent years has shown, it will get up there and he will play great, but his numbers will probably come down in that regard. The bad news for Orlando is Markelle Fultz tore his ACL last night. He's likely out, so Cole Anthony, anyone who hasn't picked him up in your league, pick him up if you need a point guard. I don't necessarily think he's going to be great, but you might as well pick him up and take that risk, right? So his field goal percentage, Cole Anthony, is probably going to dip your team a little bit, but he could also be great trade bait if he could just put together 2 or 3 weeks worth of great basketball. So Orlando in general will likely fall off, and they're probably going to end up by season end. They're probably going to end up at the point where they're fighting for a playoff seed. So I don't expect them to continue this trend. In terms of their players, they're probably going to play most of the season. I don't see many rest days. I don't see why. Most of the players are young, and their best player, like Vucevic, he's still young, and there's no reason for him to sit. All right, so next up we have is... my nose is so itchy today. All right, so next up we have is Indiana, also at 6-2. So Sabonis, like Vucevic, is playing great basketball. He's been killing it. He's been on fire. You would like to see a little bit better on the defensive side, but I mean, Sabonis is what Sabonis is, you know. So you can't get everything from him. The main thing I would say with Indiana would be Oladipo's probably going to get more load management days if they continue this play. And they're 6-2, and TJ Warren's been out for a bit. So when Warren comes back, they're probably going to even be a better team. So I don't see what's going to slow down Indiana. But in terms of their players, as long as Brogdon stays healthy, which would be my main concern, especially if I own Brogdon, if you looked at his career stats, he's injury prone. He's kind of a lot like Kyrie in regards of how many games he's going to play per season. If you want to get a better understanding and idea of just Brogdon's career in terms of how many games he's played. All right, so next up we have is Boston. They're currently 6-3, and let's face it, Jaylen Brown might be him or Brandon Ingram most improved player this year so far. They've been killing it, and Brown and Tatum, they've both been great players. Exactly, top 5 picks in their respective drafts, and they're playing like that. And they're currently 6-3. So the one thing I want to say about Boston is, even when Kemba comes back, I actually think Brown and Tatum are going to be the 1-2 options. And I kind of feel like Kemba is likely going to be like that far down third option when he comes back, when he gets fully healthy, because of how well Jaylen Brown's been playing. Like, his field goal percentage is like 53% on the year. Like, you don't get that too many two guards shooting 20 shots a game at 53% a year. The only knock on Brown is 73% from the free throw line. So if he could somehow get that up a little bit, he'd be probably like a top 25. Well, definitely a top 25 player at the very least. So anyway, the only other thing I want to say about Boston is, if they were going to trade for Harden, I think they would have already done it. And they're going to get stronger when Kemba returns, and there's no reason to break up this chemistry. They're 6-3. They're playing well. They're going to get stronger with Kemba. They've played with Kemba before. They know what Kemba brings to the table. And even Jeff Teague's been a little bit banged up. He's day-to-day. So I expect Boston to be able to perform at this high of a level all season long. Heading into playoffs, they're going to be one of those teams that people are going to talk about for reaching far in the playoffs. And I don't think Boston's going to consider. I mean, they may consider it very, very lightly, but I don't think they're going to be in contention for James Harden either. All right, so next up we have is Milwaukee. So I'm not going to talk about the Knicks, because the Knicks are what the Knicks are. I want to see more of what they can do, because right now they've just been shooting really well, and like Thibodeau has been. Well, I guess I'm going to talk about the Knicks a little bit. So they are the 5th seed. They're 5-3, whatever. Sorry, I had a phone call. I just want to make sure it's not important. So Thibodeau's been riding his starters like 35 to 40 minutes a game. I don't know how you can play that many minutes for a condensed season like this for 72 games. I am not huge, I'm not a buyer on the Knicks. But if you have Knicks players and starters, now might be a great time to sell them. Because I'm personally, even though none of them have the injury-prone label, who's to say, like I said, I don't know how they're going to make it through the season playing that amount of minutes in such a condensed schedule. So it's something to very much consider if you have a New York Knicks right now. So next up we have is the Milwaukee Bucks. They're currently 5-3, and Drew Holiday and Middleton have been playing really well together. A lot better than I would have expected right out of the gate. They're putting up very good fantasy basketball stats, and I actually think the thing that's kind of holding him back a bit is Giannis. He's having some bad games. He had a couple opportunities to win some games. So he's going to get it together, and once he does, I expect them to make a push for that top seed in the Eastern Conference. But in terms of anything else, I don't see why, with the way Drew and Middleton have been playing together, I don't see them making any kind of move on Harden, even though if you watch one of my previous videos, I said Milwaukee would be a good destination for Harden, because Milwaukee had the proper I'm blanking on the word. They had what Houston was looking for, more or less. All right, so next up we have is, surprise, surprise, 7th seed Cleveland Cavaliers at 4-4. So my thing with the Cavaliers are, if they remain around 500, maybe remain around the 7th to 9th seed. Well, not a 9th seed, but if they remain in that area, are they still going to trade Kevin Love? Or are they going to make the playoff push? It's going to be very interesting to see that, because right now with Kevin Love, if they do try and make that playoff push and make the playoffs, Kevin Love, when he returns, is going to be a good commodity for your fantasy basketball team because they're going to want him to play. They're going to want him to play 30-plus minutes. And he can at least provide a solid amount of value for your fantasy basketball team. But on the other hand, if they start choking and they start losing a bunch of games, well, Kevin Love can go anywhere, and who knows, he might be on the bench only getting 20 minutes a game. So any Kevin Love fantasy owner wants Cleveland to do well. You should be rooting for Cleveland. You should be rooting for them to make playoffs because if they do, it's better for your team because Kevin Love, again, will be guaranteed to get the 30-plus minutes a night. All right, so next up is the 8 seed, and we have Brooklyn at 4-4. Now they're starting slow. Steve Nash. I'm thinking of the WWE. Ooh, or not WWE. WCW. That's how long ago that was. Wow. You guys remember Kevin Nash, the 7'2" guy, the power bombs? He was awesome. Anyway, so Brooklyn's starting off slow. They're 4-4. Now, Nash is trying to figure out his lineups, like he's playing around with it. Like in the last game, he had like 3 new starters. Granted, Kevin Love was out, but he's just trying to get a feel for his best lineups right now. So Kevin Durant's been out. Dinwiddie's out for the season, and Karis LeVert's been inconsistent at best off the bench, right? Kyrie Irving, he's been the best player so far on the Nets. The most consistent player who's played every game. Like I said, Kevin Durant, I mean, he's been great, don't get me wrong, but he's missing because of COVID protocols, so it's kind of throwing a wrench into things. So the last part, let me think. So the last thing I do want to say is there's kind of like a torn, I feel like there's like a tear between whether to start DeAndre Jordan because of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Wow, I don't know why I keep saying Irving. Or to start the better player, Jared Allen, who I own, by the way, too. And start Jared Allen, who absolutely, he started last night and absolutely was a monster against Gobert. 18 points, 19 rebounds, like 2 steals and 3 blocks or something like that. He was lights out. I don't understand why he's not starting. He should definitely be starting. He should definitely be getting 30 minutes a game. Even with DJ starting, Allen is getting more minutes, though, but I honestly, at this point, after what Allen did in the last game, if he can be consistent like that, if he could do that game in, game out, not in every game, but in most games, I fully expect him to just win over that job regardless of what KD or Irving say. All right, so the next team up on the list is the 4-4 Atlanta Hawks. Now, they've been struggling a bit. They started off great. They were 4-1. They lost their last 3 games, and that's due to injuries like Gallinari, Okongwu. I think a couple more people sat out. Like, I think Herder missed the game. I could be mistaken on that, but I think he was the guy who missed the game. And their shooting has just been inconsistent. So with that regard, expect that to be Atlanta's forte all year round. They're going to blow out teams that they shouldn't be blowing out because their offense is just that strong, but they just have no defense, so they're going to get blown out on the days where their shots just aren't falling. So expect the inconsistency. But this is important, though, because Atlanta, if they're right there for that playoff spot, they're going to want to play their guys, right? They're going to want to play them like Trae Young. They're going to want to play him extra minutes. They're going to want to play Bogdanovic extra minutes. They're going to want to play Hunter extra minutes. And we're going to touch base with Collins in a separate video, so I'm not going to get into him now. But also, Capella should get his solid minutes. So there should be no rest days later in the season, which bodes well for anyone who owns the Atlanta Hawks players. Next up, we have, the Chicago Bulls are 4-5. They play better with Lauri Markkanen in the lineup. And honestly, you could try buying him low. I heard that in someone else's fantasy podcast. I don't know who in their right mind would sell Markkanen low right now. Okay, he had a right calf contusion, so what? But he's just under COVID protocol right now. If you can get him, go for it because I expect him to be a 20-8 guy this year. I have him, and once so with my team, I have Porzingis, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Markkanen. they're all out right now, all on my IR. So once all three get back and they look all healthy, I fully expect to move Mark Hannon, and I expect to be able to move him for a nice haul. So again, I would hold on to him, let him give you value. He's going to. He's probably I'd say Levine's the first option, and then it's like either Kobe White or Mark Hannon for that second option. But all three of them are going to get their numbers, and he's the best big man that they have, especially with Wendell Carter Jr. struggling like he is. Even though he had a great night last night, his numbers are actually on the decline, believe it or not, with Mark Hannon now. So, and I'm going to touch base on that in another video as well. All right, so our next team is the Miami Heat, who's 3-4. Now, they've been struggling a little bit. Basically, Jimmy Butler sprained his ankle first game of the year. He's been out. He hasn't been playing well. He's finally starting to play well now. But now that Butler is looking and appearing healthy, I expect the Miami Heat to make a strong push to solidify themselves around that 4 to 6 seed. I think they overachieved last year. And I don't think they're going to be close to what people expect this year, especially in the Eastern Conference. East looks like they've gotten a load better. I feel like Philadelphia got a ton better. Milwaukee got so much better with Drew. I don't see Miami making that big of a push to get as far as they did last year. But in any regard, I still expect them to be a playoff team. And let's just say they're fighting for a playoff spot. Like, season just isn't going the way they planned. Well, A, do they play their guys more minutes? Or B, do they give in to Houston and trade Bam for Harden and combine Harden with Butler? And that should be a very interesting storyline as we get closer to the trade deadline. But it's just something I want to say first here, something to think about for the future. Months ahead at least. All right, so next up we have is the Charlotte Hornets. They're 3-5, and LaMelo is playing really well right now. So it's just a matter of time before he gets put in the starting lineup. So my question is, who's the one getting benched? Rozier, Graham, or maybe even Hayward? One of those three guys is going to get benched for Melo. So who's it going to be? Next up we have is Washington. And all I got to say about Washington is Beal and what army? Beal's been a god this year. He's been killing it. He just scored 60 points on my 76ers, who have one of the strongest defenses in the league, and he's been putting in point performances like this all season long. He's killing it. And I know Russell Westbrook has been giving fantasy owners triple doubles, but he's not efficient. His percentages suck. It's just Beal, and I feel so bad for him because if he was on a winning team, oof, that would be scary. So that's just something any Bradley Beal fantasy owner may have to consider. If they keep struggling like this, like they're 2-6, I believe. They're 2-6. He can't play any better. There's no supporting cast around him. Maybe at some point he's like, listen, Washington, I've been here for 8 to 10 years. I've been waiting for you to put a team around me. I think it's time for me to go win a championship elsewhere. So Bradley Beal might be one of those high priority names that might get moved at the trade deadline. Something to keep an eye out for. Just something to think about at the very least. But I expect him to, and I do say that because you may want to trade him because he is by far the #1 option in Washington. But at some point, if you hear a little bit of rumblings, or if Washington continues to be this bad, like they may just rest him, or not rest, but just sit him, because what's the point of playing your star player if you're not playing for the playoffs? Kind of like the Pelicans did with Anthony Davis when Anthony Davis wanted out. So that could come to play at some point this season. So Bradley Beal may be a great player to trade away if you have him. All right, so next up we have is a surprise, Toronto Raptors. They're only 1-6 this year. Siakam's struggling. Van Fleet has struggled quite a bit. Lowry struggled a bit. And in my eyes, they're actually, if they sit here and they get a little bit better and they're on the outside of playoffs, they're probably my favorite team to move, basically to get make a trade for James Harden. And I feel like the key part of that trade will be Fred VanVleet. I don't think they're going to move Siakam with Wood playing the way he's been playing. It makes no sense to me to put Siakam on that team or to trade for Siakam and put him besides Wood with Cousins and coming off the bench. It makes no sense to me. So in that regard, I think Fred VanVleet would be a perfect 2 for Houston to get back for Harden. So then you're going to play for now, and you're going to get draft picks in return. So you can play for now and get a future investment and try and build for the future as well. So it's kind of like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So again, like I said, I actually think Toronto is the favorites to acquire James Harden. And then the last team is the Detroit Pistons. No surprise here, they've been awful. Hayes is currently out. D Rose is now out. They don't have anything on there. Wright's a bust. I expect them to be in that fight for their top 3, top 4 lottery pick this season. There's just nothing there. So I fully expect D Rose to get moved and probably Blake Griffin to get moved at some point this season as well. All right, so that was the Eastern Conference. We're going to talk about the Western Conference for a bit. So first up we have is the Phoenix Suns, who are currently the top seed at 6-2. Now, it's kind of weird because for Phoenix, their star players, Ayton, Booker, and even Chris Paul, they're kind of struggling a bit. They're performing below our fantasy expectations or projections, right, guys? But the funny thing about it is their secondary players, their role players, they're exceeding expectations and projections. So it's a weird mix, right? So at some point, you either have to think that the role players are going to cool off, and then the Ayton, Booker are going to come back, and they're going to come strong, and they're going to take over the team and win games like that, or they're just going to completely faceplant. I don't know what to expect from this team right now. But again, so with Ayton, with Booker, I expect their teams to get better. Or excuse me, their value to get better, because I don't see the role players playing this well all season long. Next up we have is, surprise, surprise, the Lakers. They're 6-2. The only thing I want to say about that is LeBron hasn't rested yet, so I don't know when he's going to start. That's crazy to me. And then I do expect AD to get more and more rest days, especially when they prove that they can win with him getting those rest days. And the team is thriving right now. Like, it looks like Harrell and Schroeder actually like it. Well, don't like it, but like they don't mind and take on the challenge for when AD sits. They like getting their stats when he does it. So it's working for all the parties. Next up we have are the Clippers at 6-3. There's not too much to say about them except Kawhi hasn't rested yet. Now he had the mouth injury, so he missed a couple of games on that. But I haven't seen him miss any games yet, so that's a plus for anyone who picked up Kawhi. I kind of wish I did right now, because if he plays every game, he's definitely a first-round talent. All right, so next up is actually a surprise to me. The Golden State Warriors are the 4th seed at 4-4. Now, it's not a surprise to me that they're the 4th seed or that they're 4-4, but I watched their first 2 games. I watched them get blown out horrendously in their first 2 games, and I did not think that they would bounce back this quick with the way Oubre and Wiggins play, but then they got better, and now they were actually 4-3 and they lost their last game. So the reason I want to bring up the Golden State Warriors, though, is if they remain here at the 4-5 range, or just in playoff contention in general, I was kind of worried after the first 2 games. I'm like, oh my God, they're going to sit Curry. They're going to rest him and get him back healthy with Clay next year, and then they're going to make the run. But if they're in playoff contention, Steph's not going to rest. So anyone who has Steph, that's a good thing. All right, so next up we have is the Pelicans at 4-4. Well, Utah Jazz are 4-4 too, but there's nothing to talk about. I think Donovan Mitchell is going to play. I think Gobert is going to play. They're both young. So moving on. So the Pelicans, the only thing I want to say about the Pelicans at 4-4 at the 6th seed is Brandon Ingram has been playing lights out. He's definitely in the mix with Jaylen Brown for most improved player of the year. I think it's going to come down to those two if they keep playing the way they play. And Zion's playing. He's doing great. He's doing Zion things. I think this team, with those 2 players, they might actually get a lot more time come later in the season to make that playoff push. But we'll see how that plays out. Okay, so the next team I want to talk about Well, the next team up is Sacramento Kings. So there's nothing really to talk about except Halliburton's probably going to take over for the injured Fox for a while. So he's definitely a good player to have on your squad. Harrison Barnes, probably a good pickup. I have him on my team. I can't drop him. He's been too good. And what's his name? Rashawn Holmes is killing it too. He's keeping Whiteside on that bench. So until Holmes gets injured or starts playing really, really poorly, which I've never seen. I'm a Sixers fan. He was actually drafted by the Sixers. I never really seen him have a bad game. But until maybe he gets injured, Whiteside's a non-factor. And I only bring that up because I still see comments about Whiteside. So that's just my 2 cents about him. Next up we have is the 8 seed Portland Trail Blazers. Now, what do I have about them? Okay, this is an interesting team. So they're 3-4. They are currently the 8 seed. CJ McCollum he's playing the best basketball of his career. He is killing it, right, guys? Like, I was not expecting this from this guy at this point in the season. But he's been playing lights out. But the thing is, they're still losing. They're still 3-4. He cannot play any better. Now, I know Nurk, you could probably blame most of it on Nurk because he's been probably the fantasy bust of the season so far, bar none. But I want to bring this up because they're now an interesting team. If they hover around that 8 seed, well, do they move CJ McCollum and bring in Harden? Do they get that upgrade in Harden and tear up the chemistry for a chance to win in the playoffs? Or maybe they're just falling out of the playoff race and they go after Harden to get in the playoffs to make that run. That's a really interesting team. So I do think they are going to be in the mix for the Harden sweepstakes. All right, so we have the Dallas Mavericks. Porzingis is... All right, so anyway, Dallas Mavericks, there's nothing really to say about them. They have some injuries. Porzingis injured. Kleber is pretty beat up, banged up right now. I'm pretty sure he's day-to-day. All they have is Luka, and they're going to continue to struggle until they get Porzingis back. And quite honestly, outside of Luka and maybe Josh Richardson, there's no viable fantasy options on that team that I can think of. So not really anything to talk about there. We have the Denver Nuggets next up at 3-4. Now they struggled to open up the season, particularly Jamal Murray has really been struggling with the shot. Turns out he's got like a sore elbow or something, some kind of elbow problem, right elbow, which can mess up your shooting or his shooting. They started the season 1-4. Now they are 3-4, and the Joker's been playing probably the MVP type of basketball, right? He's definitely an MVP candidate, to say the very least about him. He's killing it, I expect them to get. They're too good to be 3-4, in my opinion. I expect them to get boosted up. They're going to be a top 4 seed like they've been the last few years. I'm not worried about Denver at all, unless the Joker gets hurt. That's the only way they fall out of playoff contention. Next up, the San Antonio Spurs, who are 3-4. Now they've been, fantasy-wise, it's kind of funny. So they're the exact opposite of the Phoenix Suns. So they're overachieving in fantasy. Like the fantasy stats, DeRozan's been killing it. He's been getting a far more assists than he ever has. DeJounte Murray's been killing it. For the most part, he's cooled off a bit since his strong start, but still very strong player, very strong stats. Who else is there? Rudy Gay, he's okay. You know, he could be a streamer pickup. Marcus Aldridge, he has a sore knee now, but he was fine. Not the best, but regardless. But who else? Oh, Keldon Johnson and Lonnie Walker, also 2 great pickups. All those guys, well, those 2, DeRozan and DeJounte Murray, have all been killing it. So, in that regard, you think they'd be winning games, right? It's not necessarily the case. They're 3-4, and Pop will likely mix something up, try and do something if this trend continues, because he's not a coach to just sit on his hands. He's gonna make moves. Especially if they're right on the outside, the cusp of a playoff seed. And they didn't make it last year, so you know Pop's going to want to get back into the playoffs after making it for like 20 straight years. I forget what the number is, maybe 22 years. Okay, so next up we have is Oklahoma City. The only thing I got to say about them is SGA. He was overhyped coming into the year, and now we're all seeing it. So he was, my opinion, he should have been a 4th round pick. He was taken in the second round of my league. He doesn't appear to be that number one option. When that number one defender is on him, he hasn't proven that he could handle taking on the best defender on opposing teams night in and night out. So with that, I think what you're seeing from him is what you're going to get all season long. And unfortunately, I don't think he was supposed to go in the second or third rounds. But if you got him in the fourth round, great. But yeah, he is what he is. The only good news is there's no one else on Oklahoma City. So maybe he can get hot, and I would try and wait for him to get a hot streak going and then trade him. All right, so next up we have is the most interesting team in the league this year, the Houston Rockets at 2-4. They're 2-4. Harden's playing extremely well. Wood's playing extremely well. Even Cousins, when he's on the floor, has been extremely good. John Wall's been playing very well, right? All those guys have been playing well. They're still not winning. They're still not winning with all that talent on the floor. They're, 2-4. So the Wall and Wood experiment, it's just not resulting in wins. So the question lies, when is Houston just going to give in? And when are they just going to trade Harden for what they can get, best offer available? Since they haven't moved him yet, we could take a lot in from him not being moved yet. They never got what they were looking for, which was probably like 2 first-round picks and a star young player. They probably couldn't get something like that. They were probably only offered like secondary players that could be starters, like a Levert and a Dinwiddie, but they didn't get what they were looking for. And then B, maybe they're waiting for that March 5th, that date. And the reason why that date is so important, like I was talking about it with Fred Van Fleet before, is because that's when all the free agents that signed this past offseason are eligible for trades regardless of situation. So by that time, everyone's going to be available for trades. Right now, FVV is not available, and there's plenty of teams or players with teams on them that we have talked about that have players that are not available because of that reason alone. So I think the beginning of March, like the second week of March, is going to be the best time to see a Harden trade. So until then, Houston's just going to be rolling with the punches. And I know a lot of people are talking about how awesome Harden to Wood connection has been, and it's been great. Wood has been a great fantasy player for fantasy owners this year. He's been at like 23 and 10, 2 blocks a game, great percentages all around. You couldn't ask for a better big, right? Especially I think he was drafted in the 6th round in my league. So with that being said, who knows if that's not working, resulting in wins. I have to imagine that, Houston's going to move on from James Harden around that early March area. All right, so next up we have is the Minnesota Timberwolves at 2-5. Not really surprised. Karl-Anthony Towns is hurt, and without him, sometimes they look like a JV team. They look horrendous. I watched the Lakers versus Minnesota game. That was the most embarrassing performance I've seen from an NBA team in quite a while. And I'm a Sixers fan who watched most of the Trust the Process games when we had Tony Roten as our best player. So just put that into perspective. So I also do want to say that this is my last favorite team. So there's Toronto. Who's the other team I was thinking of? I'm blanking. Oh, okay. So Toronto, Portland, and then Minnesota is my last favorite, my last team in terms of a team that would benefit greatly from not only acquiring James Harden, but also having assets to trade for James Harden. So, and if you want to see like the specifics, go watch my James Harden trade destination videos. They're great videos for just exploring a James Harden trade with various teams. There's 2 of them, by the way. Anyway, so this is my last favorite team, and if they can acquire Harden, they preferably earlier than March, because by that time half the season's over and it's gonna be hard for them to make playoffs and gain chemistry and whatnot, and then still win and then make playoffs. But just imagine something like D'Lo, Harden, Karl Anthony Towns, or even Harden, Beasley, Karl Anthony Towns, or just Harden and Karl Anthony Towns. That'd be a nice 1-2 punch, right? All right, so the last team up is the Memphis Grizzlies, who are 2-5. Basically, they need Ja back. They're struggling without him. They lost their last 2 games, and he's the catalyst for that team. Without him, there isn't really anyone on that team. I know Dylan Brooks has been playing great basketball, fantasy-wise, but he's not going to do that when Ja gets back. Also, they need Jaren Jackson Jr. back as well. He had a great rookie season. They need him back for his sophomore year. They need him back. They need him healthy. And I expect those 2 to get minutes and to play well together. I still don't see Memphis pushing for playoffs if they continue losing like this. Like if they're 4-10 or somewhere around that range when Ja gets back, and by the time JJJ gets back, it's going to be hard. I personally feel like they don't have enough talent to pick up 6 games throughout the course of the season. I could be wrong. But so that begs the question, are they going to rest Ja at the later end of the year? Are they going to rest JJJ? Or are they going to just play them and get as much experience as possible? I think they're going to play, but I do think there's going to be nights where they do sit if they continue to be bottom seller, just the seller team. I don't know why. I'm trying to think about what I'm trying to say. I can't figure it out, so I'm just going to move on. But anyway, so that's all the teams in the NBA. So again, hopefully this gives you some insight on each individual team, and if you have any players on any of the teams I specifically was talking about, maybe this will help you plan for the future. Think about things that you haven't necessarily thought about yet, especially like the Bradley Beal thing. I've heard no one talk about that. I'm just saying. Anyway, guys, please make sure you hit the like button on this video if you enjoyed it, if you feel like it's informative, even if it just gave you something to think about. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, as I'm going to be bringing more fantasy basketball content all season long. So that's all I have, and have a good day.